John from Ripewave Audio back again with our Why to Buy series, and this time we're focusing in on Onkyo. What are the compelling reasons to purchase an Onkyo AV receiver in 2024, and what type of buyer, what type of system would be best suited for an Onkyo AV receiver? And in this lineup, what they have currently active in their portfolio is their flagship TX-RZ70, that's $2,800 unit, their RZ50 at $1,600, their NR7100 at $1,300, their NR6100 at $800, and the NR5100 at $600. These are high-value AV receivers. They package in a lot for the money compared to other brands out there in the market. And when it comes to premium audio company, the owner of the Onkyo brand, they also have the Pioneer and the Integra ranges, but the Onkyo tends to be their most value-oriented line. Of course, the Onkyo brand has been around for a long time, and a lot of you might just select Onkyo because you have a positive history with that brand. We've done a lot of videos on Onkyo, and it started in 2021 when Onkyo was really revitalizing its brand, and it ultimately led to ownership changes. But we did a video of all the products that they introduced in that year with a video then. But in 2023, that's when we started to bring in Onkyo products in-house for our own evaluation, and it started with the TX-RZ50. We did a 3-part series at the beginning of the year. Now, about that same time, Onkyo was introducing their new flagship, the TX-RZ70. We did an introductory video, but it wasn't until the end of the year in November, December that we did a 5-part series, bringing the RZ70 flagship in-house to fully explore that. Now we're coming back to you now with this video to really highlight the features and attributes that really make this a compelling brand. It all starts with the TX-NR5100, the $600 unit. Get somebody in to the Onkyo AV receiver lineup at a 7.1 capability, 80 watts of amplification into 7 channels. So very modest. For those that have easy to drive speakers, maybe a smaller room, and can't accommodate a large number of speakers, this may be a good place to start. We'll point out here that this is one of the few receivers out there in the market today that still is using those spring clip binding posts for the surround speakers. Now, of course, the front, left, and right are a nice 5-way binding post. The TX-NR6100 takes it up a notch at $800, still a 7.1 capable system, but the amplification now is increased to 100 watts per channel. A lot of customers are looking for at least 100 in many cases. But gone are those spring-loaded binding clips, all 5-way binding posts on this unit. Then comes the NR7100 at $1,300. You get 2 more channels of processing, which will bring it to a 9.1 configuration, making it more capable of introducing some immersive height channels to your system. Still 100 watts per channel, but you're also getting 2 more channels of amplification. So that's 9 channels of amplification. So you could fully power those speakers that are connected to this internally without using external amplifiers. Next comes the RZ50. This is the first model that has the RZ designation instead of the NR designation. So the RZ line is a little higher up in their portfolio. At $1,600, this gives you 12 channels of processing. So 2 more channels of processing over the 7100, this time at 120 watts per channel into 9 channels. That's available here. The other thing about the RZ50 is it has this door that opens up that exposes some extra buttons. You don't have that on the NR series. Now moving to their flagship, the RZ70, this you'll pay a considerable amount more for at $2,800, but you get another channel of processing, which is the first unit that allows for an extra subwoofer discrete output. So 2 discrete independent subwoofer channels. This is the only model in the Onkyo lineup that has that. So if you're one that has 2 subwoofers and you want to control those independently, this is the only model that you would find in the Onkyo portfolio that supports that. The other thing that this unit does is gives you 11 channels of internal amplification at 140 watts per channel. Now, of course, all these amplifier ratings are at 2 channels driven, so if you're driving them all, you're not going to quite get that same power output that is specified on their documentation. Like the RZ50, it has a little door that opens and exposes the extra buttons. I took a couple of photos when the RZ70 was here a few months ago, and it gives you a little clearer picture of what this looks like. Now, one complaint I have about Onkyo is those buttons to select the input on the unit are so small, and the lettering on it is so hard to read, and they're abbreviated into 2 or 3 letter. It's really not a good UI design on those input selects on the unit. I do find that the lettering is easy to read on this front display, albeit those indicators that show you the modes and the speaker layouts are awfully small. And this is a complaint about these brands that continue to stick with a dot matrix style screen. Yes, they use some of the larger letters to show you the input mode or the volume, but all those other indicators are pretty much lost on the front display. Turning around the back, you can see the general layout here with some wires connected to it, so it gives you a real practical look at the back of this unit. Looking at these all side by side, this whole family of AV receivers, you'll notice that the Flagship, you're not going to get more than a 7.2.4 configuration out of Onkyo AV receivers. So if you're planning to do a third row of heights, or you're planning to do front wide speakers, Onkyo is not the brand for you. But 7.2.4 seems to be the sweet spot nowadays. Those who are planning to do immersive audio, if they're not doing it initially, this is what they aspire to do. They'd like to get to a 7.2.4 because that's where you can still notice a lot of the impact changes without getting those diminishing returns. So once you start adding front wides and extra rows of heights, it's not as noticeable on the impact of that addition to your system. And most of us who can afford subwoofers usually don't go beyond 2 subwoofers, although 4 is getting to be more popular with the super enthusiasts out there. So if you're planning to do more than 2 subwoofers, again, Onkyo is probably not the brand for you unless you're okay with sending the same signal to more than 1 sub. Cosmetically, these units look very much the same. All you can see those RZ lines with their door that conceals the buttons has a little cleaner look to them than the NR modeled products. All of them support Dolby Atmos and DTS:X, which is really the common baseline of all AV receivers nowadays. The exception is the RZ70, which also supports Aural 3D. It's the only model in the Onkyo portfolio that supports Aural 3D. This addition came after release of the RZ70, and they added that with a firmware update. None of them support DTS:X Pro, which is to be expected because it is limited to 7.2.4 configurations. If you go down to the NR series, you're going to be limited to either a 5.2.4 or a 7.2.2 configuration. Now that .2 in the middle there, of course, is 2 subwoofers with common output. So it's really a 5.1.4 or a 7.1.2 configuration. Of course, if you go to the 6100 or the 5100, you're got 2 less channels of processing. So you're down to a 5.2.2 or a 7.2.0 configuration. So if you want to do immersive, you're probably up to the 7100 at least. And I would recommend really considering the RZ50 over the NR series if you really are looking to do a full Dolby Atmos setup. They all support Dolby Vision, but IMAX Enhance is only going to be on the top 3 models. THX certifications. Onkyo is one of the only brands, other than the other PAC-owned companies, Pioneer and Integra. Onkyo is the only to have THX certification. You can find it on all these models except the 5100. Now, the other thing that you'll see in common is they all support Dirac Live, and they all support Acute EQ. Now, Dirac is one of the most popular room calibration systems out there today, and Acute EQ is their own proprietary room equalization that they've had for years, and it's only till this recent series where they've introduced Dirac Live. And that's available on all of them, but you're only going to be able to get the Dirac Live bass control option on the flagship, the TX-RZ70. And that's going to cost you a little extra money if you want that option enabled. We just looked at the Dirac site today, and we did confirm that that still is the only model that supports bass control. Looking inside these models, you can see the difference between the flagship, the RZ70, and the RZ50. There's a big difference in how those internals are handled. Notice there's a much bigger fan in the lower end models. These heat sinks are done differently in the RZ70. The power supply is different and unique there. Yes, there's still fans in the RZ70, particularly over the HDMI board. For the RZ50, now that's very similar to the NR7100, which is also shown here, but you can see that it does have a little better power supply in the RZ50 and that some of the capacitors are a larger size. So you do get a little more quality components in the RZ50 over the 7100, but generally it's the same chassis and layout as the NR series is using. Now, I'll quickly point out that these all have a 1/4-inch phono jack in the front of them. They all have an AM/FM tuner, if that's important to you. The power is set at the factory, so you have to buy it in the region that you intend to. It's 110 versus 220. A little bit more on this speaker setup. Now, this could be compelling to you if you are looking at Onkyo. It does support bi-amplification of the front and center speakers. Of course, you're going to give up some of those internal amplifiers if you choose to do that for that purpose, and you'll have to use external if your speaker count requires. You can find Onkyo models that do have not just a Zone 2, but a Zone 3 output. So if you're doing multi-zone, Onkyo could be a good choice for you. One thing I'll point out is that you'll see for the crossovers that Onkyo does put a little indicator that 80 Hertz is the THX preferred crossover. Another thing that you'll get with Onkyo is a double bass option. And what this will do is, as well as sending bass out to your low frequency subwoofer, it will continue to produce those low frequencies on your main speakers if you set it to double bass. So not just the subwoofer, but now your front speakers, if they're capable, can be set to double bass. I will point out, if you're interested in Aural 3D, what you're pretty much getting is an Aural 9.1 or 11.1 in a 7.1 plus 4 height configuration. This means you're not going to take advantage of a top center voice of God channel or a front height center channel that Aural 3D has in their other layout options. One thing that Onkyo doesn't have that the Integra model has is the ability to utilize a passive subwoofer, and that meaning having some of your amplifiers drive a subwoofer. That's only in Integra, so don't expect it to be available for Onkyo, but we don't see this in any other brands. I think Integra is very unique there. A little more on crossover settings. Onkyo has this feature that they call speaker combo, but on their website, they'll call it Clips Optimize Mode. And what this does is Essentially, if you own some clip speakers, and there'll be particular models that are available, that they've calculated out what they believe to be the optimal crossover settings for those speakers. Now, it's not a big deal if you don't have clip speakers and if you don't have this feature, but it does make it easier if you happen to have clip speakers and you happen to have one of these Onkyo AV receivers that supports this mode. You put in the model of the speaker and it will put in the optimal crossover settings. So it just makes it easier for you. It's just not that you can't come up with the same setting. And the reason they are doing this is Premium Audio Company also owns the Klipsch brand of speakers. So they're taking advantage of having speakers in their portfolio. Some of the firmware updates that have come along with Onkyo is they've done some bug fixes, but they've also added in this Klipsch optimized mode. They've added in extra features for HDMI, such as auto low latency mode and variable refresh rates. They also added in those oral 3D functions we talked about and source-based tone mapping that was introduced with HDMI 2.1a. They also added in support for Dolby Atmos music and some configuration of Dirac delays and allowing you to do up to 50 millisecond delays. They added in room ready support, updated from room tested. So improvement there, and they added a preamp mode, which we typically would see in like a Denon Marantz product. And the last firmware update they just did in April did some more bug fixes and stability improvements, but they don't articulate which those were. Now, Onkyo specifies a signal-to-noise ratio ranging between 106 for the lower-end products up to 107 dBs to the RZ70. All very close. They're all using pretty good DAC chips to help achieve this, like the ESS chip that's found in the RZ70 that is an ES9026 Pro chip. I don't know what the DACs are in the other models, but this is the one we know. And we'll assume that it's probably an ESS of similar capabilities because those specifications are very close on the actual output. These all support DSD, and we're glad to see that. It supports up to DSD 256 and PCM of 24192. So pretty good on the DACs. You still have some legacy equipment that have video component or composite outputs. You'll be happy to hear that the RZ50 and the RZ70 still support a few, where most brands are dropping these today. So you won't need any adapters to get that video signal into your AV receiver. They all have a moving magnet phono input, so you could hook up a turntable to this. And they all have a lot of video inputs. They all have 6 video inputs and 2 or 3 outputs. One thing to point out is if you want to use external amplification, you're not going to get it with the NR series. The NR series is really designed to be using just the internal amplifiers. The only outputs you get are for the subwoofers. You have to move up to the RZ50 or the RZ70 to get those 11 channels of pre-outs for your main and surround speakers. When it comes to video, these are supporting the HDMI 2.1, and it's doing it for all channels, except for the 6100, which is only got it for 3 channels. Now, they're all supporting variable refresh rate and quick frame transport, auto low latency mode, DSC, hybrid log gamma, HDR, HDR10 Plus, and Dolby Vision. IMAX Enhance, as we said earlier, are not on the 2 lower models. All have HDCP 2.3. So if you're looking for 2.1 support, Onkyo has it. They all have Ethernet ports. They all have wireless. They all support Bluetooth, and they're supporting it in and out. So if you have a Bluetooth headphones or speakers, you could transmit out to those, but not simultaneously receive and transmit. Supports voice commands, Alexa, Google, Josh AI. It has support for integration through Ethernet, through infrared, through a DB9 connection, except for on the 5100 and the 6100 models. You don't have as much integration on those, and you don't have any trigger outs. The others just have a single trigger output, not as much as what you would find, let's say, on an Integra, which is really designed for integration. If you were looking for a lot of triggers, Onkyo is probably not the brand for you. You might want to move to something like an Integra that has more of those triggers, etc. It supports AirPlay, Chromecast, Sonos. Now we're Roon Ready supported, Spotify, DTS Play-Fi. They've dropped Flare Connect from their portfolio. Internet streaming is built into this. Amazon Prime, Apple Music, Deezer, Pandora, Spotify, Tidal, and Tuned In. Maybe not as much as some of the other brands, but I don't think this is a big selling point, because if you have something like an Apple TV, you're going to bring in all those streaming services anyway from that device. Why have it direct into the product? The remotes on these are all the same on the lower models, except for the Flagship gets its own unique remote. This was redesigned from the prior models. It's the only one that is backlit, albeit we've stated in prior videos that the backlit doesn't help so much because the writing on the button is so hard to read. They're abbreviated, they're small fonts. I don't think that is a very compelling reason to move to the Flagship. Go for other reasons, not because you get the backlit feature. Here's just the summary of all the physical dimensions. These can be big units, particularly if you get into the RZ50 and 70. Pretty tall, 7.9 inches is the highest unit, which is the 70, almost 19 inches in depth, and it's 48.5 pounds or 22 kilograms. So this is a heavy unit. This is one of the heavier receivers out there. It takes a lot of power to drive this, and but in standby it's only using 1/10 of a watt. Warranty on these are all 3-year warranties, so not the best in the market. We've seen as much as 5-year warranties from some brands. All these models have an on-screen display setup, which is fairly good. A remote app, so you can download this remote app. I think it came out in 2020, and they've adapted it to these newer models. You can also do Dirac Live calibration from the remote app, but you're going to get a smaller feature set than what you get using the Dirac Live external application. But what they've done is made it easy for those who don't want the complexity of having to set up a PC or a Mac computer, loading in that software, using an external microphone with that app. Instead, with the mobile app, you just plug in the microphone that comes with it into the 1/8-inch phono jack microphone input of these units, and you can get in and do your calibration. Now, albeit with not as many listening position points available, you are limited either 3 or 9 points if you're using the mobile app. But for those who want it quick and easy, the mobile app may be for you. Just realize that you're going to be a little more limited, but we're nice to see they're giving you options. There is also a web page, probably designed more for the custom integrator. Can help you with your setup. I wouldn't call this a runtime playback UI here, but it is good for setting up your speakers and backing up and saving configurations, for example. You do have an equalizer that's built into this, but it's not what I would call a parametric equalizer. When you're using AccuEQ, you can adjust for standing waves that are in here, all from this web interface. Now, one of the last things I'll point out is some of the performance on this unit. Onkyo has some of the fastest boot up times that we've measured. 2 seconds from standby and 5 seconds from cold boot. That's almost as good as the Integra and Pioneer brands. They're probably all based off the same technology. I don't know why the Onkyo was a few seconds slower, but gosh, I'm not going to worry about between 2 and 5 seconds. When you look at something like a Sony or an RMC1 that takes almost 90 seconds to boot up from cold boot, that's a much longer, certainly much better with the Onkyo at 5 seconds. So very good there, beating out even, let's say, Denon Marantz at 10 or 14 seconds. Finally, the sound quality. I thought the sound quality of the Onkyo was very good. On the RZ50 that we brought in, we found that that was a tier 2 sound quality, fitting in with the likes of the Marantz Cinema 40 or the Denon AVR 4800, but better than the Cinema 50, which we also have in-house. When you move to their flagship, the RZ70, it brings you up to top tier performance. Now, we've said in the past that these bubbles, if you're in that one bubble, it's really hard to tell the difference between one model and the other. I picked a position based off of my listening test, but if I listened another day, maybe I would have skewed a little more to the left, to the right, or down or up. But this gives you a general sense, but there's definitely a clear differentiation between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. The fact that Onkyo sits between Tier 1 and Tier 2 in their RZ series, that's really good. Now, I've never brought in an NR series product, so I don't know where that sits in these bubbles. That would be interesting feedback in the future. So this kind of wraps up a lot of the things that we liked and noticed about the Onkyo. Maybe it's going to help you make a decision and determine if this is the right thing for you to buy. Like I said, the good things are the sound quality, lots of features. If you move up to the flagship, you do get Oral 3D. You do have flexible room calibration choices. It's room ready. You have some integration tools built in we didn't talk about, such as video test signals, integration and triggers. There's the Dirac bass control option for the flagship. But what we didn't like is the remote was a little hard to read, and as well as the front panel there with those input buttons. You are limited to a 7.2.4 layout, even with their flagship. So if you plan to expand your system beyond that, Onkyo is not the brand for you. We found that the front display is a little outdated. The quality of that could be better. Cycling through the sound modes, that was an annoying part for us because you couldn't just go to the sound mode you wanted. You had to keep on hitting the button until you reached the sound mode you wanted. The fact that these have fans built into it. And finally, the Dirac Live. Glad to see that they've implemented it. Glad to see that they provided it at no charge. If you go to Denon Marantz, you have to pay extra for Dirac Live. But I don't think their implementation is quite as good as the others. There's a little delay. It's even still mentioned on the Dirac website that if you do have an Onkyo product, it does take a little longer for the files to exchange between the software and the receiver. So that's the wrap up here. What are your thoughts? Is Onkyo a brand you're considering, and you find that these are compelling to you? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and consider joining our Patreon community at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. Of course, you can hit that thanks button too to do a one-time donation, always appreciated, and it costs nothing to hit that bell notification so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.